I, 36, F, and have two siblings. My brother Damon, 34, M. He and my sister Nancy, 28, F. Simply put, Nancy was and always has been the golden kid, particularly in my mother's eyes. Dad had some wisdom. He'd periodically urge Nancy to cut it out, but he gave her far more liberty than Damon or me. Mom, forget it. Before we continue with today's story, if you're enjoying what you've heard so far, please hit that subscribe button. Every new subscriber helps me keep sharing these inspiring tales that touch your day. Thank you for your support. She would let Nancy get away with anything. Nancy was what my parents affectionately referred to as a surprise. She arrived considerably later than Damon and me, and I feel the age difference contributed significantly to the special treatment. She has been handled differently since she was able to walk and talk. It's tough to pinpoint exactly how it manifested, but it was everywhere. More attention, a larger presence, constant praise, basically more of everything. Great. What if she misbehaved? No consequence. Mom would laugh it off like it was the cutest thing in the world. Growing up in the shadow of a beloved brother is an especially terrible experience. It reduces your self-worth. You continuously feel inadequate, as if you're always in second place. Or in my case, third. You begin to believe that no matter how hard you work, you will never be as excellent as others. The most hurtful component was the mom's outright reluctance to admit the bias. If Nancy said something cruel, and trust me, she had a skill for it, Mom would ignore our injured sentiments, stating we were overly sensitive or Nancy was joking. However, it was never a joke. You could see it in Nancy's eyes and the small, satisfied grin she'd give. She relished making us feel small. I recall a period when I was approximately 12. I received new clothing, which I was quite excited about. Nancy took one look at me and exclaimed, "It makes you look even wider than usual." Mom just laughed and said, "Oh, Nancy, don't be silly." But I felt my face boil with humiliation. It was a consistent pattern. Our family seemed divided into two teams, Mom and Nancy against the world, and Dad, Damon, and me, who were constantly on the defensive. Even Dad wasn't a dependable teammate. He would frequently flip sides, presumably to keep the peace. So what types of activities did Nancy do? It was a relentless assault of vitriol directed at anything and everything. My appearance, Damon's job goals, and our life choices. Nothing was off bounds. She had a flair for identifying and exploiting your insecurities. The Thanksgiving situation with Damon is an excellent illustration. He was enthusiastically expressing his literary degree, his love of reading, and his desire to write. Nancy casually referred to him as an unemployed burden at the dinner table in front of the entire extended family. The hush that ensued was deafening. Dad grumbled something about Nancy being out of line, but Mom simply smiled indulgently. Another day, after a particularly demanding week at work, I was complaining to Nancy about how fatigued I was. She pounced on that, starting into a rant about how I looked extremely haggard and how my long hours meant I'd never find a guy. She said, and I remember the exact words because they stung so badly, "You look like you haven't slept in days." And honestly, no guy wants a workaholic hag who looks like she's aged 10 years in the past too. I went utterly silent for several weeks following that. I couldn't force myself to speak to her. It wasn't only us. She treated friends, extended family, and strangers with the same casual disrespect. Anyone other than Mom was fair game. Damon and I rightly harbored considerable hatred. We despised Nancy's brutality, but we despised Mom much more for allowing it. I recall having a particularly intense debate with Damon, during which I stated that we despised her for it, referring to Mom's unflinching support for Nancy's behavior. I know it seems harsh, but it's the honest truth about how we felt. I believe Nancy's physical attractiveness contributed to her difficulty coping. She appeared conventionally attractive. I know it sounds petty to admit, but it is relevant. It is simpler to disregard insults from someone you consider equal or even someone you regard as inferior to you. However, when someone who is commonly regarded as gorgeous tells you that you are not, it is taken more seriously. It plants the seed of doubt in your mind. I began to question my own appearance and worth looking back with the advantage of hindsight and therapy. I believe Nancy's relentless urge to criticize others stemmed from her own deep-seated insecurity. She did not follow a traditional career path. She dabbled in freelance graphic design, but it was more of a pastime than a profession. She depended greatly on our parents, both financially and emotionally. Perhaps she belittled others to compensate for her own perceived flaws. Damon and I tried to disregard her words until we were 25. Things changed radically. Our father died 8 years ago, and he was in many ways the glue that held our fragmented family together. Despite his own role in the imbalance, he wasn't ideal. He certainly tolerated Nancy's behavior more than he should have. But he was the one who periodically attempted to mediate, to smooth things over, to keep some sort of order. His death devastated their fragile connection. After he left, Damon and I began to move apart from Mom and Nancy. It began slowly, with fewer phone calls and visits. We'd still see them at big family gatherings, the rare holiday, and maybe Christmas, but only on special occasions. If we felt like it. If we wanted to, we could make that phrase our motto. Then it became an intentional decision. We actively began avoiding them. A wall, as I've learned to call it, had formed between us and them. Honestly, I like the wall. It provided a much-needed barrier, reducing exposure to Nancy's attacks and witnessing Mom's anger, enabling initially. Following Dad's illness and final death, we made real attempts to retain communication. We felt obligated, I think, but those attempts were really strained. Each phone contact and visit felt forced and unpleasant. During those brief contacts, Mom would almost always say or do something that reinforced our need for distance. She'd make some lovely remarks about Nancy's non-existent successes or discreetly critique our decisions, reminding us of why we were pulling away in the first place. One especially embarrassing Christmas meal. Mom spent the entire evening extolling Nancy's creative talent, displaying some very horrible drawings Nancy had allegedly done for a large client who turned out to be a distant cousin. Meanwhile, she entirely overlooked Damon's recent promotion and my successful completion of a large assignment at work. It was a vivid reminder of the dynamic we were attempting to avoid. Damon and I eventually started making excuses, which became more complicated. We were overloaded with work. We had prior engagements. We were coming down with something, anything to avoid spending time with them. We understood that the emotional cost of those contacts far exceeded any felt familial obligation. Damon and I shared a tacit, unspoken agreement. We both acknowledged the dysfunction and implicitly agreed that distance was the best option. It wasn't that we didn't want to visit after Dad died. Rather, we opted not to. It was not about insulting his memory. It was about safeguarding our own mental and emotional health. Crucially, Mom and Nancy made no meaningful effort to keep communication. They weren't continually phoning, pleading with us to come. The decision to drift away was mutual and unspoken. We were all financially stable, so there was no practical reason for frequent interaction. It was just easier to maintain different orbits. The silence was a relief. Damon suffered a serious accident a few years back and shattered his ankle. He was between jobs at the time and devoted all of his efforts and resources to the establishment of an online magazine. Money was scarce and medical expenses were building up. As the CFO of a successful company, I volunteered to assist him in covering the bills. He originally refused, being the fiercely independent individual that he is. But I persisted. I didn't want him to spend his savings just as his magazine was ready to launch. I covered everything: his medication, the considerable physiotherapy he required, and even the cost of a full-time nurse to help him recuperate. To me, it was an obvious choice. It wasn't about the money. It was about supporting my brother, whom I actually cared about and wanted to succeed. It was an expression of sibling love and support. This gesture of charity, however, unintentionally, established a hazardous precedent in the minds of Nancy and my mother. A few weeks later, Nancy called me and left me stunned. It was so bold and weird that I immediately assumed she was joking. She told me she wanted to acquire a penthouse apartment. Not just any apartment, but a penthouse, and she required my financial assistance. She defended her ridiculous request by claiming that she was embarrassed to still be living with her mother at the age of 28, and that since I had helped Damon, it was only fair that I also hit her. She carelessly forgot to disclose that she only had enough money to pay for half of the cost of this luxurious apartment. My instant reaction was a mix of disbelief and boiling rage. We rarely talked, and when we did, it was generally interrupted by Nancy's insults and hostility. And now, out of nowhere, she is asking for a large sum of money. It was surreal. We had not had a genuine, meaningful chat in years. The last time we spoke, she was busy criticizing my life choices, doubting my career, and making snarky remarks about my appearance. The audacity was amazing. I sought to understand her career or lack thereof. She billed herself as a freelance graphic designer, although it was more of a casual pastime than a legitimate profession. She had no formal education, no degree, and no portfolio to speak of. She'd made a couple of posters for Dad's firm years ago, but they hadn't been utilized. She pretended to have a list of exclusive clients, but they were mostly family friends, drawn in by mom's constant push. It was certainly not a career that would allow me to afford a penthouse, so I gave a solid no. I told her straight out that I was not going to support her expensive lifestyle. I suggested, perhaps a little harshly, that she consider finding a real job if she wanted to purchase such pleasures. I know it wasn't the most polite response, but I was honestly taken aback by her entitlement. She took my refusal poorly, as one would expect. She went on a furious diatribe accusing me of bias towards Damon. She screamed about how I had readily assisted him with his medical expenditures and how it was my responsibility as the eldest sibling to support her too. She entirely ignored the reality that Damon's predicament was an actual emergency, whereas hers was a self-induced craving for luxury. I tried to be calm, but my patience was getting thin. I reiterated my refusal, emphasizing that I was not a bank and was not obligated to pay her unreasonable goals. I was so disgusted by her entitlement and complete lack of self-awareness. It was as if she truly believed she deserved this penthouse simply because she was my sister. The talk quickly turned into a full-fledged dispute, with Nancy's voice reaching near hysterical levels. Finally, I said no one and hung up the phone. I couldn't take another second of her screeching. She phoned back several times, but I ignored every call. I was finished. It was quite evident that our relationship, or whatever pretense of a relationship we had, was entirely transactional for her. She only contacted me when she wanted something, with no consideration for my sentiments or the years of awkward quiet between us. It was completely exhausting. Unsurprisingly, the drama did not end with Nancy's rage. My mother called me next, and the talk was much more aggravating. She began with a whining, passive-aggressive tone, complaining about how unfair I was to Nancy, and accused me of playing favorites. She claimed I owed them anything because of my upbringing. Then she revealed an important detail. Nancy had approached our uncle, Dad's brother, who had taken over the family business before coming to me. He had rightly turned down her plea. This exposed the extent of their desperation, and the fact that I was their second option further increased my rage. A little background. I purposely chose a career path outside of the family business. I did not want to be involved. Neither did Damien. To be honest, Nancy didn't either until it was convenient for her to pretend differently. After Dad died, his brother took over the company and Mom lived comfortably on Dad's shares, which had been legally transferred to her as part of his will. Mom then admitted that their financial condition was fragile owing to Nancy's lavish spending habits. She claimed that providing Nancy with the money for the penthouse would make things easier for her in the future, implying that she wanted me to subsidize Nancy's lifestyle so she didn't have to. She then used the standard guilt trip, threatening no contact if I refused to comply with their requests. This was simply ludicrous, given that we were already in a position of very little interaction. I politely pointed out the contradiction, telling her that it wasn't my concern and that Nancy could get a job or stay with her until she was 35. For all I cared, my wrath, which had been building for years, suddenly erupted. I let loose a flood of pent-up rage. I told her she had no right to accuse me of favoritism because she had been doing it my entire life. I reminded her that Damon and I had made peace with her obvious preference years ago when we accepted the truth of our broken family dynamic. I clearly explained that I owed them nothing and that I had my own life obligations and objectives. She responded with more ranting, accusing me of being ungrateful and disrespectful. She screamed that she never wanted to speak with me again. I chuckled because really, what difference would it make? We scarcely spoke as things were. I mentioned my approaching wedding, emphasizing that I did not need her presence in my life. Then I hung off the phone and blocked her and Nancy on every platform possible. An important detail I didn't mention earlier. I should probably clarify that I am engaged to a beautiful, supportive man named Andrew, 30. We've been together for nearly 5 years, and he's been quite understanding of the nuances of my familial situation. Initially, I considered bringing Mom and Nancy to the wedding solely out of obligation and desire to keep some sort of family peace. But what happens following that explosive phone call? That thought went totally. However, the aftermath of the confrontation was not as simple as I had anticipated. Mom, unable to reach me directly, messaged Andrew via social media. She poured out her highly biased version of events, expressing her profound disappointment in me and announcing that she would permanently cut me off. Despite knowing I was right, I felt a little guilty. It's a bizarre, irrational feeling that societal indoctrination tells you that family is everything, regardless of how bad the connection is. Furthermore, Andrew first hesitated to grasp the situation properly. He is from a close-knit, caring, and supportive family. He had no idea that his mother and sister could be so cruel. He originally felt pity for Mom and Nancy, seeing them as the victimized parties. He couldn't fully realize the severity of the malfunction. This caused a temporary but major strain between us. I felt myself having to justify my conduct, explaining the situation's history once more. So read it. I honestly don't believe I am, but I'm interested in hearing your thoughts. And thank you for reading this entire long narrative. Update 1. Fortunately, the encouragement I received online from strangers on Reddit who had read earlier sections of this story was quite affirming. Their remarks, shared experiences, and unflinching support all helped to alleviate those niggling doubts. They reminded me that I wasn't alone, that my emotions were genuine, and that I had every right to defend myself from toxic people, even if they were family members. Damon, as always, reiterated what the online trolls were saying. He reminded me of innumerable examples of Mom and Nancy's manipulative conduct, constant negativity, and complete lack of empathy. He acknowledged my feelings and assured me that I wasn't being unreasonable or overreacting. He, too, had been through it. He understood a crucial turning point. The most significant turning point, however, was when Damon sat down with Andrew and described the problem from his perspective. He gave specific examples, went over the history of the family dynamic, and built a vivid picture of the emotional toll it had on both of us. Hearing it from Damon, who had seen the dysfunction personally, made all the difference. Andrew's opinion changed almost fast. He finally understood. He saw the problem for what it was: a toxic, extremely unhealthy familial dynamic that I needed to get away from. He apologized for his initial concerns, confessing that his own happy family experiences had blinded him to the reality of my circumstances. He even stated that his own parents would never behave in such a manner. From that point forward, Dad became my loyal supporter, totally backing my decision to cut ties with Mom and Nancy, taking action. So we took action. We stopped them. Mr. Damon, Andrew, all of us on all platforms. Update 2. Just as I thought it was over, just as I thought the drama was done, it took another unexpected turn. My uncle's dad's brother, who had taken over the family business, contacted me and Damon about an urgent situation. He sounded quite anxious, nearly frantic. He informed us that Mom was preparing to transfer a significant percentage of her company shares to Nancy, and not just any shares. She meant to offer Nancy voting shares, giving her enormous authority over the company. His reaction was quick. He thought it was a completely bad idea, a recipe for calamity. He understood, as we all did, that Nancy was completely incompetent in business. She had no experience, complete lack of comprehension. She has absolutely no interest in anything other than her own superficial desires. Giving her vote rights in the corporation was, in his opinion, a terrible blunder that may destroy the entire operation. He stated that while Mom theoretically had voting authority, she had always deferred to his judgment. She had never interfered with the operation of the firm, trusting him to make wise decisions. He was really concerned that if Nancy took control, things would change. He saw continuous debates, power struggles, and potentially dangerous judgments motivated by Nancy's desires and Mom's blind favoritism. He plainly indicated that he did not want to be in ongoing disputes with them over every area of the firm. A difficult realization. Damon and I became instantly alarmed. We understood that the company's success was critical, not just for our uncle, but for the livelihoods of many people. We also experienced a sense of obligation, a lasting commitment to our father's legacy. So we arrived at a difficult decision. We couldn't just stand there and watch this unfold. We felt a moral obligation to intervene and try to avert what we perceived as an imminent calamity. We agreed to speak with our mother despite our damaged relationship and the recent heated incident. We also felt a special obligation to our uncle, who had been so supportive and kind to us following Dad's death. He had, as I previously stated, watched out for us, and we couldn't in good conscience leave him to cope with this potential disaster on his own. We were concerned about the company's future, and we felt compelled to safeguard it, even if it meant confronting Mom and Nancy again. Update 3. The confrontation. We braced ourselves and went to see Mom while expecting that Nancy would be there, and that her presence would make the conversation exponentially more difficult. We knew it would be unpleasant, but we believed it was necessary. As expected, Nancy was perched behind Mom like a deadly bird. We jumped right into the subject, expressing our strong objection to the plan to give Nancy voting shares. We labeled it an utterly ridiculous concept without holding back. Mom originally used a technique of stony silence, refusing to acknowledge our presence or worries. She completely ignored us, as if we were not present in the room. Then she changed tactics, stating that we had no right to meddle in her decision and that she had no desire to engage with us. Nancy predictably screamed about how we were envious of her, how we had never taken the opportunity to be part of the family business, and how we were acting as if we owned the establishment. Her voice rose to a fever pitch and her face distorted with wrath. It was an extremely unpleasant and stressful scene. I anxiously tried to argue with Mom, appealing to her sense of logic and accountability. I informed her on several occasions that Dad had expressly specified that he did not want any of his children involved in the day-to-day operations of the company. He had implicitly trusted his brother, our uncle, and wanted to prevent any future family squabbles or court battles. I highlighted that I had consciously selected a different career path based on Dad's intentions, out of respect for his vision. I begged her, virtually pleading with her to reconsider her choice, to consider the probable repercussions, the harm she could cause to the corporation, to our uncle, and to everyone who relied on the business for a living. Throughout my attempts at a calm discussion, Nancy continued to scream allegations of envy, hatred, and interference. She even threatened to call the police on us as if we were trespassers, intruders in our mother's home. It was an insane display of entitlement and wrath. Nancy was probably afraid. She knew deep down that her financial security, her entire lifestyle, depended on her mom's continuing control over the corporation. She was terrified at the possibility of losing that stability and having to rely only on herself. Also, I believe Mom's silence during Nancy's outburst was a purposeful aim to make me feel horrible, as if I was attacking her. Finally, after what seemed like an age, Mom quieted everyone. She told us in a cold, dismissive tone that we had been extremely disrespectful and offensive, and she instructed us to go. She stated she would consider what we had said and notify our uncle of her decision. Nancy, of course, remained at her side. Damon and I departed. We had done our best. We had made our point plainly and forcefully. We had appealed to Mom's sense of reason, to her devotion to Dad's wishes, to express her concern about the company's future. But we didn't know if it had made an impact. We hoped she'd reconsider, but we were ready for the worst. That night, I spoke with Andrew, describing the events. I assured him that even if things didn't go our way, at least we tried. Update for surprising results. 2 painful weeks passed. Then our uncle phoned us again with fantastic news. He informed us that after great thought, Mom had decided not to give Nancy voting rights in the company. Instead, she planned to transfer preferred shares to her, which would give Nancy a steady income but no control over the company's activities. It was a huge relief. Nancy's probable mismanagement did not pose a threat to the organization for the time being. Our uncle could continue to manage it successfully without the constant danger of interruption. Most significantly, Damon and I maintained no contact with Mom and Nancy. This was the ultimate victory. The entire scenario had been extremely distressing. It seemed weird to have to intervene in a situation that was officially not our immediate issue. However, we felt ethically bound to intervene to defend our uncle, to respect our father's desires, and to secure the company's future. Addressing a key assumption, I should clarify something to answer any potential questions or misconceptions. After reading earlier postings, some people concluded Dad had abandoned us, his other children with nothing. That is simply not true. He did leave U.S. assets independent from the company's shares. I had not previously highlighted such assets because I did not believe they were directly related to the underlying dispute, which revolved around Nancy's entitlement and Mom's enabling behavior. To clarify, yes, we did inherit other things. Dad wasn't completely ignorant of Nancy's shortcomings. He was not. As I previously stated, in the same boat as my mother, he had a soft spot for her and indulged her more than he should have. I prefer not to focus on the bad features of his personality. I hope to remember him warmly. The essential issue is that we were never financially dependent on Mom or Nancy. We had our own resources. We have our own careers. We live our own lives. Update 5: The final fallout. So here we are. Months later, the no-contact order remains firmly in force, and it has been gloriously peaceful. My wedding is only a week away. The invites have long already been sent out, and obviously, Mom and Nancy were not on the guest list. Our relatives, with whom we still communicate, have kept us up to date on the situation. Mom and Nancy appear to be in a complete meltdown. They found out about the wedding from our uncle, who was, of course, invited. They've been aggressively attempting to sabotage the event by contacting other family members, discouraging them from attending. spreading lies and distortions about me and portraying themselves as innocent victims. It's pitiful, predictable, and completely unsurprising. A prime illustration of their deceitful, attention-seeking behavior. They cannot bear the thought of me being happy, of carrying on with my life without them breaking the cycle. My relationship with Andrew is diametrically opposed to the one I had growing up. He is loving, kind, supportive, honest. He taught me that family should not be conditional. Remember the harsh cutting remarks Nancy used to fling at me? How could she predict I'd end up a jobless, lonely, workaholic heck? Well, the joke is on her. I am none of those things. I'm happy I am successful, and I am going to marry the love of my life. And Damon, he is proving all of his critics wrong, including those who discounted his love of reading. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so, and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.